My father did not just call my uniform below our family. He used my name to try to bury a federal file and then showed up at my base asking me to save him. I learned that truth at 6:42 a.m. in a windowless operations room at Fort Belvoir, where the air always smells like coffee and copier toner, and the clocks are never set to local time. The duty officer slid a folder across the metal table without meeting my eyes and said there would be no salute today, no eye contact with visiting civilians, and no deviations from protocol. The words were calm and ordinary, but the order made my stomach tighten because nothing about that morning was ordinary. My phone vibrated once in my pocket and stopped. I did not check it. I listened to the rhythm of boots in the corridor and the steady scratch of a pen from the desk behind me, and I kept my face still the way training teaches you to keep it still when something inside you is cracking. When the folder opened, I saw my last name in bold on an email header that was not mine, a letterhead I had never authorized, and a sentence that suggested I had endorsed a set of assurances I had never given. My father had typed my name to make his story look clean. He had typed my name to give credibility to a narrative that could not stand on its own. The room felt colder. I remembered the exact way he used to say it at dinner when guests were over, and he wanted to remind me of my place. That uniform is below our family. Do not bring that military nonsense to my door. He said it with a smile then, and people laughed because laughter is easy when you are not the one being pushed out of the picture. The folder kept offering small, sharp details, and each one landed like a quiet blow. A timeline that did not match reality, a chain of emails forwarded twice, too many times, a signature block that leaned on proximity rather than proof. I closed the folder and slid it back exactly an inch because precision calms me. I asked who requested the review. The answer was the same one I had been hearing all week, a joint briefing with press present later today. I nodded. I felt my pulse settle into something usable. The door opened, and a man in a suit paused at the threshold, waiting for clearance he did not have. He wore the look I had seen on my father 100 times when doors opened for him without asking. This door did not. Security asked for identification, and he fumbled like a person unused to being slowed. When they clipped a visitor badge to his lapel, his shoulders dipped as if the air had suddenly changed density. That was when I knew. He was here because he needed me. He saw me then, and the relief on his face arrived before the fear. He mouthed my name the way people do when they think the word itself can fix things. He leaned toward the desk and whispered that it was urgent, that it was family, and that we could talk for 5 minutes. I did not move. I did not look at him. The order said no eye contact, and I followed it because rules are a shelter when feelings are a storm. He tried again, softer this time, and I heard the plea slide under the control he always wore like a tailored jacket. I remembered being 17 in Buckhead with a glass sweating on the table between us, while he explained that if I enlisted, I would lose the house, lose the phone line, and lose my mother to stress he would describe later as illness. I remembered the way my brother Carter laughed too loudly, and the way my mother Elaine stared at the napkin as if it had answers. I remembered my father saying he did not raise a daughter to take orders from people with nothing, and how he said it as if the sentence itself were a gift. In the present, the duty officer cleared his throat and reminded everyone of protocol. My father stiffened and tried to smile his way past it. The smile failed. He was escorted to a chair against the wall, where civilians wait when systems move without them. I felt a pressure behind my eyes that I did not allow to become anything else. A JAG captain stood near the door, flipping through a legal pad, and gave me a look that said we would do this by the book. I breathed in, counted 4, and breathed out, counted 4. When my phone vibrated again, I checked it because timing matters. It was a single text from a number without a name. Thanks for the save last quarter. Short, controlled, not a promise, a reminder. I locked the screen. When the briefing began, my father tried to take the room with his voice, and the room did not yield. The rules were read, the scope was defined. Press lenses clicked and then went quiet when the moderator asked for statements under oath. My father glanced at me again, and this time the fear won. He asked if I could say a word, Just one sentence. He said family helps family. I said nothing. I said nothing because silence was the only thing that could not be twisted. When the questions turned technical, he stumbled. And when the questions turned procedural, he tried to redirect. And when the questions turned to endorsements, he reached for my name like a rope. That was the moment the betrayal became clean and undeniable. He had not come to apologize. He had come to borrow my credibility. The duty officer slid a new envelope across the table toward me without ceremony. The label read Potential Conflict of Interest Immediate Family. I took it and placed it on top of the folder and felt the room exhale. If you have ever had a parent shame your work comment your state, I am listening. The briefing recessed. Security cleared the room. My father stood and tried to close the distance between us, and a guard stepped in gently and stopped him, because gentle is still firm when the line is clear. He said my name again, and this time there was no control left in it. I kept my eyes forward. The order ended, and I turned away. The first time he disowned me, he smiled. The first time he needed me, he could not. To understand why he needed me, you have to see how he broke me first. I am Reese. I was 25 that morning, and I am an enlisted Army intelligence analyst. I do not talk much. I observe, I endure, I write things down. I learned early that records outlast excuses, and that dignity is easiest to keep when you do not trade it for noise. May 2018 Buckhead, Atlanta smelled like cut grass and chlorine and expensive perfume that clung to the air long after the guests left. My father called it home, but it never felt like shelter. It felt like a showroom with rules. The driveway curved like a private road, and the front door opened to a foyer built to impress strangers, not comfort family. That night the house was full of my father's people, men with polished shoes and quiet watches, women who smiled with their teeth and measured you with their eyes. They were there for a small cocktail hour before a charity dinner. My father liked having an audience when he corrected me. He liked witnesses because witnesses become pressure. I stood near the edge of the living room, holding a glass of water I did not drink. My father held a lowball glass of amber liquor that caught the light like a trophy. My brother Carter leaned against the fireplace in a suit that still looked new. He laughed at everything my father said, even when it was not funny. My mother Elaine sat on the sofa with her hands folded in her lap, staring at her own wedding ring, as if she could rub it hard enough to erase the moment. I was 20 years old then, and I had already made my decision. I had not said it out loud yet. I had learned that saying things out loud only gave my father something to step on. He turned toward me and asked in a voice designed for the room why I had been distant lately. I heard the softness he performed when company was present. I heard the steel underneath it. I said I had been thinking about my future. Carter snorted into his drink like it was a joke. My father smiled thinly and took a slow sip. Then he said it as if he were discussing weather. You are not joining the military. Not in this family. The conversation around us thinned the way it does when people sense conflict and want to be entertained without being implicated. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my face still. I said I was considering it and that I had spoken to a recruiter at a campus event. My father set his glass down with a careful click that sounded louder than it should have. He stepped closer so that his body blocked me from the others, but his voice still carried to them. He did not shout. He never needed to. He used calm like a weapon, because calm made his words sound reasonable, even when they were cruel. I did not raise a daughter to take orders from people with nothing. He said it like a principle, like a moral. Carter laughed a short, sharp laugh and looked around for approval. A few guests chuckled politely because they did not know me well enough to feel ashamed. My father continued with the same measured tone. Do you know what it looks like for a girl from this house to stand in a line and be told when to eat, when to sleep, when to speak? Do you know what it says about me? About our name. He did not ask what I wanted. He asked what it would do to him. I felt heat climb into my cheeks. I focused on details because details kept me steady. the condensation on my glass, the faint smell of his cologne, the way Carter rolled his shoulders as if he had already won, the way my mother's eyes did not lift. My father took one more step and lowered his voice, but not enough. Listen carefully, Reese. If you sign anything, if you enlist, if you embarrass this family, you will lose this house. You will lose your phone. You will lose access. I will cut you off completely. He let the words sit. Then he added the next part, the part designed to hook into my ribs. And your mother will get sick. You know how she is. She worries. Her blood pressure, her heart. Do not do that to her. Elaine did not protest. She did not say my name. She did not tell him to stop. She inhaled and pressed her lips together and stared at her hands harder. Carter leaned forward like a spectator at a game. He said, "Come on, Reese, just be smart about it. Dad is right. You do not need to prove anything. You already have everything." The lie in that sentence landed heavy. Everything meant their approval. Everything meant staying owned. My father gestured toward the room and the people and the polished surfaces. This is your future if you do not ruin it. Intern at my firm. Sit on boards. Learn how power works. You want discipline. I will give you discipline. You want structure? I will give you structure. You do not need a uniform. I wanted to tell him he had given me nothing but a cage. I wanted to tell him I was tired of being presented like an accessory. But I knew how he would twist it. He would call it emotional. He would call it childish. He would make it about gratitude. Instead, I let my silence do what it always did. It made him talk more. It made him reveal himself. His eyes narrowed and his voice hardened a fraction. You think you can walk out and come back whenever you want. You cannot. If you do this, you are not a daughter in this house. I felt my stomach drop, not because I believed him, but because I recognized the pattern. He was not afraid of the military. He was afraid of losing ownership. He was afraid there would be a place where his money could not reach me, a place where my last name did not open doors, a place where he could not call someone and make consequences vanish. The realization was quiet, but it sharpened everything. I watched the way he looked at me, not like a person, but like an asset he was about to lose. My mother finally spoke, but it was not a defense. She said, "Reese, please do not start something we cannot fix." Her voice was small, a warning disguised as concern. I nodded once. I did not promise anything. I excused myself with a polite sentence and walked down the hallway past framed photos of our family smiling in places that never felt real. In my room, I opened a drawer where I had hidden a manila folder under textbooks. Inside were my practice test scores and a list of EMOS options and a business card from the recruiter with his office number written twice. I stared at it until my breathing slowed. Later that night, after the guests left and the house fell into its expensive silence, my father called me into his study. He sat behind his desk like a judge. Carter stood to the side like a witness. My mother hovered near the door like she wanted to disappear. My father repeated the conditions slower this time, as if repetition made them lawful. House, phone, money, family, your mother. He ended with the softest knife. Do not shame us. Do not make us a joke. I looked at him, and I saw the only thing he truly loved: control. I said goodnight. The next morning, I drove my own car to the recruiter's office without telling anyone. I wore a plain shirt and kept my hair pulled back. The lobby smelled like carpet and printer ink. A poster on the wall showed soldiers in uniforms looking forward like they belonged to something larger than fear. I filled out the paperwork with a pen that did not shake. When the recruiter asked if my family supported me, I said no. He nodded like he had heard it before. I signed where I was told and slid the papers back across the desk. On the way out, I did not feel brave. I felt clear. When I got home, my father was waiting in the kitchen with Carter and Elaine. Carter had my phone in his hand like he had been searching through it. My father did not ask. He said, "You signed it." I did not answer. He leaned closer and smiled a cold, controlled smile. Then he hit the last weakness he knew I carried. Fine. You want their orders? Go. But understand this. Everyone will know you chose to disgrace this family. The cut came quietly, at first the way serious decisions often do in families like mine. My father's assistant sent an email with a polite subject line about account adjustments and a paragraph that framed necessity as generosity. Tuition payments would stop at the end of the term. The credit card tied to my name would be closed for security reasons. The car insurance would no longer list me as a driver. There was no anger in the wording, only distance, which made it worse. When I checked my bank app, the balance was unchanged, but the access flags were different, and I understood the message clearly. You are on your own now. At a small brunch a week later, my father introduced me to a group of friends I had known since childhood and waved a hand in my direction as if I were an exhibit. Reese is going through a phase, he said with a laugh that invited agreement. She thinks discipline comes from uniforms. A few people smiled, because smiling is safer than questioning a man who funds the table. Someone asked what phase meant, and my father answered for me. The kind that passes when reality arrives. Carter raised his glass and clinked it against someone else's. He said she will be back when she realizes how the world works. I felt the familiar heat rise, and I focused on the edge of my plate and the sound of forks, and the way my mother looked everywhere but at me. The humiliation was not loud, but it was complete. It told me I would be framed as foolish until I proved otherwise, and that proof would never be accepted if it came from me. The isolation tightened as the weeks went on. Invitations stopped. Messages went unanswered. Friends who had always been my friends chose comfort over conflict and drifted away. Carter did not drift. He posted. His stories were casual photos of meetings and rooftops and captions that sounded harmless until you read them twice. Family first, know your lane, legacy matters. People who knew us well enough understood who he meant. People who did not fill in the blanks with their own assumptions, and that was enough. I did not respond. I learned early that public arguments feed the people who start them. I chose silence again, not because I was weak, but because I was building something that did not need applause. When the recruiter called to discuss options, I listened carefully. I asked questions. I read the fine print. I chose MOS 35F, not because it sounded impressive, but because it promised structure and accountability and a record that would exist independent of my last name. When the recruiter asked why I wanted it, I answered honestly and briefly. I was not chasing glory. I was chasing a clean identity. He nodded and wrote it down without comment. The process moved forward with interviews and forms and a background check that did not care who my father was. That mattered to me more than anything. The background interview was thorough. It asked about money and travel and associations. It asked about family. I answered plainly. I learned that truth, delivered without drama, has weight. I learned that details matter and that paper trails tell stories people cannot easily rewrite. When emails arrived, I saved them. When voicemail messages came in late at night from unknown numbers, I kept them. When my father sent a short message asking if I was ready to be reasonable, I archived it and wrote the date in a notebook. This was not revenge. It was discipline, the same discipline he claimed to value. Carter escalated in his own way. At a dinner I did not attend, he joked that I had always liked attention and found a costume to get it. Someone repeated it to me later like a harmless anecdote. It was not harmless. It was a signal to the circle that it was acceptable to diminish me. My mother called once and spoke in the careful tone she used when she wanted me to concede without saying the word. She said everyone was worried. She said my father missed me. She said it would be easier if I apologized. I asked what I had done wrong. She did not answer. That silence answered for her. The enlistment paperwork arrived by mail, and I signed it at a small desk in my room with the window open. I felt the weight of the pen and the simplicity of the act. No audience, no witnesses. Just a choice. 2 days later, a letter arrived on heavy paper with a law firm letterhead I recognized from my father's office. The language was formal and precise. It requested my signature on an agreement that would prevent public statements and restrict disclosure of family matters. It framed the document as protection for everyone involved. At the bottom, a line waited for my name. Sign this agreement. The timing was not subtle. He wanted silence before the record began. I did not sign. I scanned the letter and saved it with the date and the envelope. I noted the way the request came through counsel rather than conversation, and what that meant about intent. The isolation was complete now, but it was also clarifying. I could see the boundaries of my life without his money and his approval, and they were smaller but real. When the call came confirming my ship date, I thanked the person on the line and wrote it down. I packed a bag with what I owned and left the rest behind. The night before, I went to bed early and slept without dreams. In the morning, I left a note on the kitchen counter that said I would be gone for a while. I did not ask for forgiveness. I did not promise to return. I took my documents and my notebook and the habit I had started of keeping records. As I closed the door, I understood something that had been growing quietly since the brunch and the posts and the letter from the lawyer. My father was not afraid of what the military would do to me. He was afraid of what it would do without him. Fort Jackson hit me like a wall of heat and noise. The bus door opened and the air rushed in heavy and damp. I stepped onto the pavement with my bag, my paperwork, and my last name tucked away where nobody could use it. The cadre moved us into lines, voices sharp boots striking asphalt in the same rhythm. I watched hands' faces, and the small tales people think are invisible. A trainee behind me looked at my posture and my neat folder and decided I was a story he could mock. Princess, he whispered, not even trying to hide it. A second voice repeated it, softer like a verdict. I did not turn. I did not correct them. I swallowed the sting and kept my eyes forward. At Buckhead parties, they used words like phase to make me small. Here, they used princess to test what I would do when I was small. Within the first hour, a drill sergeant saw the same thing they saw, that I was controlled, and he chose to squeeze it. Reese, he barked, dragging my name through the dust. Since you look like you belong in an office, you can earn the dirt like everyone else. He assigned me the heaviest end of the first detail and made sure everyone heard it. Extra sandbags, extra water cans, extra time in the sun while everyone else learned to move as a unit. At lunch, he ordered me to carry a stack of gear for the bay that took 2 people for most recruits. Princess can handle it, he said, and the bay laughed. My shoulders burned and my palms rubbed raw, but I did not drop anything. I learned quickly that complaining here does not change the load. It only changes how much respect you lose while you carry it. The next morning, the same drill sergeant called me out again. "You still here, Princess?" he asked, like he expected me to disappear. I answered the only way I could. "Yes, drill sergeant." That was it. 2 words in a steady voice. The escalation became predictable, which made it easier to plan for. If I finished a run in the middle, I was placed at the front the next day with the slowest group and ordered to pace them. If I kept my wall locker perfect, I was told to redo it, because perfection must be hiding something. If I helped a trainee with her boots, I was accused of trying to look good. The insult stayed simple, but the message was layered. My background was a rumor, my silence was interpreted as arrogance, and my last name was a target they could not aim at directly. Reese, the rich girl, the princess, the one who thinks she is above this. They did not know the truth. I was not above it. I was inside it on purpose. I fought back without my mouth because my mouth had never won at home, and it would not win here either. I fought with standards. I learned the schedule, learned the rules, learned what was measured and what was noticed. When the platoon needed someone to keep the count tight during drill, I kept it tight. When someone forgot a form, I remembered the detail and helped them redo it the right way. When a trainee broke down in the latrine because she missed her kids, I stood outside the door and timed her breathing until she could stand up again. I did not do it for friendship points. I did it because a unit is weaker when one person falls apart. Over days, the bay changed. The same people who said princess started asking quiet questions. How did you get your boots to shine like that? How do you fold the shirt so fast? How do you keep your head when they yell? I gave answers without attitude. I showed them steps. I shared tricks. Some nights after lights out, I lay on my bunk and listened to the room settle. Springs creaked. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone sniffed like they were trying not to cry. In that dark, I understood what my father never could. Discipline is not humiliation. Discipline is a weapon you can choose to hold. It made my mind steady when my body was exhausted. It gave me a place to put anger so it did not poison my decisions. One afternoon, we were cleaning the bay after a long field exercise. The same drill sergeant watched us for a minute, then walked over to where I was sweeping grit out from under the bunks. He leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "People like your father can't buy respect here," he said. The sentence landed like cold water. He did not know my father by name. He knew the type, and he knew why I had come. That night I received mail, a thin envelope with my mother's handwriting that looked careful as if she had practiced it. Inside was a short note. She wrote that she was sorry for how things ended, sorry for the silence, sorry for letting it get so harsh. Then, the condition appeared soft and familiar. She asked me to call home to be the bigger person, to reassure my father that this was only training and that I would come back to the family once I had proved my point. I read it twice, folded it once, and felt the old pressure tighten in my chest. Even here, the apology came with a leash. I slid the letter into my notebook, wrote the date beside it, and turned off my light. In the morning, princess or not, I would be on my feet before the first shout, and I would keep moving. I told myself I was not here to be loved. I was here to become unbuyable, unbreakable, and finally unowned by anyone again. Advanced individual training at Fort Huachuca unfolded in a different register than basic. The cadence slowed just enough to reveal the machinery underneath. Classrooms smelled like dry erase markers and dust. Screens flickered with maps and flowcharts that turned information into obligation. I took notes the way I had learned to do everything else. Clean margins, dates written out, questions saved for the right moment. The instructors did not care where I came from. They cared whether I could track a thread without losing it. That suited me. I learned the difference between curiosity and clearance. I learned that most mistakes happen when people talk too much. I kept my head down and my work exact. It did not take long for the rumors to follow me anyway. Someone had Googled my last name during a weekend pass. Someone else had recognized a logo on a folder I carried. Princess returned quieter now, edged with suspicion instead of mockery. The escalation came from outside the wire. My father began trying to reach me through channels that were not his. A call from a number I did not know. A message left with the duty desk asking me to return it. An email forwarded twice with polite language about mentorship opportunities and introductions. I did not respond. I documented each attempt with date and time. When a classmate mentioned that a mutual friend of my father's had asked about my training schedule, I corrected him without anger. I said my schedule was not public and that questions should go through official channels. He nodded and never brought it up again. The boundary held because it was clear. My father tried a different approach. A package arrived with a note about family concern and an offer to help shape the story before it got away from me. The implication was familiar. He wanted to manage the narrative the way he always had. I returned the package unopened through the mailroom and kept the receipt. The instructors noticed my restraint before they noticed my background. During a briefing, an instructor paused at my desk and tapped my notebook. "Good habit," he said. "Keep records." Later, a captain asked a question that was not a test. "Can you separate what you know from what you want to know?" I answered yes, and meant it. That distinction became my shield. When a background investigator called to verify details, I answered plainly and did not volunteer. I understood that clearance is not about brilliance. It is about trust built over time. The phrase "need to know" became less abstract and more precise. I learned when to say I cannot discuss and when to say I do not have that information. Both answers were true in different ways. My father kept circling. A distant relative mentioned he had been asking about the pace of my training and whether I would be placed somewhere visible. I told the relative that I could not talk about assignments. I could hear the frustration travel down the line like static. It did not move me. One afternoon, we were given a short read-in. It was basic orientation, not a prize, but it mattered. The instructor emphasized scope and restraint. "This is not about power," he said. "It is about responsibility. You will know only what you need to know, and you will protect it even from people who think they deserve it." I wrote the sentence down exactly as he said it. Read-in did not make me important. It made me careful. The work intensified. Scenarios layered data on top of data and asked us to find the seam where risk hides. I found patterns faster than some and slower than others. That was fine. Consistency mattered more than speed. My father tried again through a friend who claimed concern for my safety. He asked if I was being taken advantage of and whether I needed guidance from someone who understood influence. I thanked him for his concern and ended the call. I noted the attempt. The next day, an email arrived from a corporate address I recognized immediately. It referenced a hypothetical situation and asked for my thoughts off the record. I did not reply. I forwarded it to the appropriate office and saved a copy. That night, I lay awake listening to the desert wind brush the building and thought about ownership again. He was not afraid for me. He was afraid of losing reach. The mini victories were small but real. An instructor assigned me to help a classmate who was struggling with analysis. We worked quietly and the classmate passed the next evaluation. No applause, just a nod. Another day, an officer asked me to brief a narrow slice of a scenario to the group. I did it without flourish. Afterward, he said good. That was enough. Toward the end of the cycle, we were introduced to risk checklists used to flag concerns in contracting and operations. The document was routine, boxes and categories, names redacted in examples. As I scanned it, my eye caught on a familiar structure in the way a company was described. Then the example changed and the redaction slipped. For a second, the name was there, before the slide advanced. My father's company, not an accusation, a reference. A marker in a list of entities requiring additional review. The room did not react. The instructor continued. My pulse stayed even. This was not a reveal. It was a confirmation. I wrote the time and slide number in my notebook. I did not draw a line between it and my father out loud. I did not need to. The system had already done that work without me. When class ended, I walked back to my quarters under a sky so clear it felt unreal. I understood then that the power I was building did not look like leverage. It looked like restraint. It looked like records. It looked like knowing when to speak and when to let the process move. The first time I saw my father's company on a risk checklist, I did not feel triumph. I felt distance, and distance was safety. Fort Belvoir between 2020 and 2022 was a place where time felt measured in briefings and calendar blocks rather than seasons. The buildings were functional, and the corridors smelled faintly of cleaner and coffee and paper that had been handled too many times. I learned where to walk to avoid conversations, and where to pause to be seen doing the work without being seen performing it. My role fit me. Liaison support and analysis meant accuracy mattered more than volume, and restraint mattered more than speed. The first call from my father came on a Tuesday afternoon when my calendar was full. "Sweetheart," he said, as if we had never fought, and as if the word itself could rewind years. He spoke lightly at first about the weather and a mutual acquaintance and a headline he pretended to misunderstand. Then the ask arrived wrapped in concern. He said there were rumors and misunderstandings, and that he wanted to make sure nothing about me was being misrepresented. He said people sometimes read too much into things, and that it would help if I could clarify a few points off the record. I did not interrupt him. I let him talk, because people reveal intent when they believe they are being heard. He filled the silence with details that were not questions and assurances that were not requests. When he paused, I answered with one sentence and kept my voice even. Put it in writing. The line went quiet long enough for me to imagine his expression. He recovered quickly and laughed the way he did when a room did not bend. He said there was no need to be formal. I repeated myself and ended the call. I wrote the date and time in my notebook. That became the pattern. He called when he needed something. He did not call to ask how I was or where I lived or what I was learning. He called to manage outcomes. Sweetheart, he said again weeks later, this time with urgency creeping into the edges. He mentioned a dinner he had attended and a conversation that worried him, and a name he dropped like bait. He asked whether certain offices coordinated and whether timelines were flexible. I listened and said nothing until he ran out of steam. Then I said, put it in writing, and ended the call. He tried email next with language polished enough to pass as benign. He asked for guidance. He asked for context. He asked whether the environment was as strict as people said. I forwarded the message through proper channels and archived it. My mentor did not use my father's name when he spoke to me. He did not need to. He looked at my notes and the saved messages and said one sentence that stayed with me. You are going to need receipts. He did not tell me what to do next. He trusted me to know. The advice was not dramatic. It was practical. Keep records. Do not editorialize. Let the process speak. The work continued. I supported briefings and tracked requests and watched how information moved when it was handled correctly and how it distorted when it was not. My father escalated without realizing it. He asked a mutual acquaintance to reach out under the pretense of checking on my well-being. The acquaintance asked whether I was safe and whether I felt pressure. I said I was fine and that any questions should go through official channels. The acquaintance apologized and did not call again. My father called a third time and skipped the pleasantries. Sweetheart, he said, and then he said names and numbers and phrases that suggested shortcuts without stating them outright. He wanted reassurance that the world still worked the way it used to for him. I let him finish and then said, put it in writing. He grew sharp and accused me of hiding behind rules. I did not argue. I ended the call. The boundary held because it was consistent. In meetings, I listened more than I spoke, and when I spoke, I kept it narrow. I did not share personal details. I did not volunteer opinions. I delivered what was asked and documented what was not. That was how trust accumulates. It is boring, and it works. One afternoon, while reviewing materials, I noticed patterns that did not align with best practices. Names repeated in places they should not. Intermediaries appeared where direct channels were expected. Nothing illegal on its face, just unnecessary complexity. Complexity is where risk hides. I flagged it quietly and moved on. Days later, a follow-up arrived asking for clarification on third-party involvement in a hypothetical scenario. The phrasing was careful. I answered with facts and references. My father tried again with a softer tactic. He sent a message that pretended to be an apology without saying the word. He said families should not let work come between them. He said he was proud of my discipline. He asked if we could talk without lawyers or policies. I read it once and archived it. Pride that arrives only when leverage is needed is not pride. It is strategy. The pressure increased outside my inbox. A vendor name came up more frequently. An intermediary appeared in conversations where none was needed. I kept my notes clean. I kept my tone neutral. I did not speculate. The mentor checked in once more and asked if I was holding up. I said yes. He nodded and reminded me that patience is not passivity. He reminded me that systems reward consistency. Late one evening, I stayed back to finish a review and noticed an attachment that did not belong to the thread. It referenced a meeting that had not occurred and a participant who should not have been there. The name of a middleman appeared twice. I traced it back and found the connection. My father's orbit, not him directly. A layer away. plausible distance, the kind of distance people use when they think deniability is enough. I felt the familiar steadiness settle in my chest. This was not a confrontation. It was a confirmation. I saved the file and noted the path. When I left the building, the lights were already dimmed and the parking lot was quiet. I understood then that toxic patterns do not disappear. They adapt. They show up only when needed and retreat when challenged. The last message from my father that year was short. "Sweetheart, we need to talk now." I did not reply. I wrote the date in my notebook. The next morning, I added a new heading: Intermediary Risk. July 2024 in Atlanta felt heavier than summer. Usually does, the air thick with heat and expectation, the kind that presses against your skin before a storm breaks. My father hosted the dinner at the same Buckhead house as always. The table set long and precise glassware aligned to reflect the lights just right, a room built for performance. Guests arrived in pairs and trios, people who knew our name and the benefits of being seen near it. I wore a simple dress and arrived on time, not early, not late exactly the way protocol teaches you to arrive when you want nothing to be misread. My father greeted everyone with the same practiced warmth and then turned to me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He introduced me as if I were an exhibit again, the tone light, the words sharp underneath. He said Reese has been busy with her government job lately. Said it slowly, tasting the phrase, and a few people nodded politely, as if that explained everything they needed to know. Carter stood nearby, scrolling on his phone, pausing just long enough to smirk when someone glanced his way. My mother hovered at the edge of the room, adjusting napkins that did not need adjusting. The conversation moved to markets and travel and a recent headline. My father waited until the wine had been poured and the room had settled into its rhythm before he took his moment. He lifted his glass and tapped it lightly, just enough to draw attention. He said he was proud of family values and discipline, said it like a toast, and then turned his head toward me. "Discipline is important," he said, "but it is not the same as importance. A uniform does not make you important. It just makes you obedient." The sentence landed hard and clean. A few people laughed uncertainly. Someone cleared their throat. Carter laughed too loud. I felt the familiar pressure behind my eyes and the tightening in my chest that always followed his performances. I kept my face neutral and my hands steady on my lap. I watched the way the guests shifted, the way some avoided my eyes and others looked directly at me to measure my reaction. This was his craft, to wound publicly, while calling it humor to turn my restraint into proof of his point. He continued with the same tone, saying how hard it must be to follow orders after growing up with opportunities. How some people choose limits because freedom scares them. Each word was designed to make me smaller without appearing cruel. Inside, something ached, old and sharp, but I did not let it show. I let him finish because letting him finish gave me the clearest record of what he was willing to say. When dinner moved on and the guests broke into smaller conversations, he leaned closer and spoke more quietly, as if offering advice. He said I could still pivot, still leverage my experience into something respectable, still let him help manage perceptions. I nodded once and said nothing. The pain was there, steady and controlled, the way you hold a weight, when you know dropping it will only draw more attention. After dessert, I excused myself politely and stepped outside into the humid night. I breathed in and counted the way I had learned to do when emotion threatened to spill into action. I did not confront him. I did not correct him. I walked to my car and drove away without looking back. At home, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I wrote the date and location and the names of the guests I could recall. I wrote the quote exactly as he had said it, word for word, because accuracy matters. I noted the time the toast occurred and the order of remarks. I saved the call log from earlier that week when he had tried to reach me twice before the dinner. I opened my email and archived the message he sent the next morning, thanking me for coming and suggesting we follow up on a few things he had mentioned. I replied once briefly, acknowledging receipt and asking that any requests be sent formally. I saved the response. This was not anger. This was setup. Revenge does not begin with noise. It begins with records. The next days passed with ordinary work and quiet focus. I did not post about the dinner. I did not mention it to colleagues. I let the timeline speak for itself. Then an email arrived with a calendar invite attached. The subject line referenced a federal briefing. The participants list included a name I knew too well, my father's. I stared at the screen for a long moment and felt the room go still around me. This was not coincidence. This was the point where private humiliation crossed into public consequence. I accepted the invite without comment and wrote one line in my notebook beneath the dinner entry. Calendar invite received. Subject includes Grant. October 2024 pulled me back to Fort Belvoir with a different weight than before. The air felt sharper, the hallways busier, the tempo just fast enough to keep everyone alert. Security was visibly tighter. Visitor badges were checked twice. Names were verified against lists that updated in real time. The same order I had heard once before surfaced again without explanation. No salute today. No eye contact with visiting civilians. Stay inside protocol. The repetition mattered. Orders like that are not issued for comfort. They are issued when lines are about to cross. I was assigned liaison support early that morning, the tasking precise and narrow, exactly aligned with my MOS. Coordinate materials, track requests, ensure communication follows proper channels. Nothing flashy, nothing discretionary. It was the kind of assignment that looks invisible until it is not. As I moved through the building, I noticed details I usually filtered out. Additional personnel at entry points. A legal liaison posted near a conference room that was normally unused. A press holding area set up one floor down. The building hummed with anticipation without saying why. I took my seat at a small table near the wall and opened my notebook. The first entry read, Oct 2024 Fort Belvoir Liaison Support. I wrote the time. A man from another agency approached quietly and set a folder down beside me without meeting my eyes. As he passed, he leaned just enough for his words to reach me and no one else. Good to have you on this. He did not smile. He did not explain. He did not need to. That was the first moment the shape of the day came into focus. The briefing began with scope and ground rules. Voices stayed even. No one speculated. Names were referenced only when necessary. I tracked who asked which questions and when. I noted how often third-party involvement came up and how quickly it was redirected to process. The no salute order held. Civilians entered and exited under escort. Cameras clicked and then went quiet. My phone buzzed once with a notification from the calendar app confirming attendance. I did not look at it. During a pause, a legal officer approached and asked me to step aside. He handed me a sealed envelope and waited while I read the label. Conflict of interest, immediate family. The words were clean and official. Inside was a directive requesting disclosure and recusal parameters. It did not accuse. It documented. It asked for facts. I felt the steadiness settle in my chest, the way it always did when clarity replaced doubt. I nodded and thanked him, and placed the envelope on top of my folder. This was the moment the private and the public finally aligned. The rest of the morning moved in controlled increments. Requests came through and were logged. Materials were distributed and collected. When questions drifted toward opinion, they were redirected back to record. The discipline of the room was almost visible. I thought about the dinner in July and the way my father had performed certainty in front of guests. This room was different. Certainty here came from documentation, not volume. At one point, a civilian attempted to engage me directly with a casual question. I did not respond. The escort intervened smoothly and guided the conversation back to the moderator. The no eye contact order was not about disrespect. It was about containment. At midday, the briefing recessed. People stood and stretched. Conversations formed and dissolved. My father entered the space under escort and sat where he was told. He did not look like he did at home. The confidence was thinner. The smile did not settle. He glanced around and then found me across the room. I kept my eyes on my notes. He shifted in his seat and tried to catch my attention with a small wave he used when he wanted reassurance. I did not move. When the session resumed, the moderator reviewed disclosures and conflicts. The language was neutral. The process was clear. I submitted my disclosure through the proper channel and noted the time. The legal officer acknowledged receipt without comment. That was enough. As questions progressed, my father attempted to steer answers toward narrative rather than fact. Each attempt was gently corrected. Each correction tightened the room. I tracked the sequence. I wrote down exact phrasing. When my father referenced endorsements, the moderator asked for documentation. Silence followed. Cameras clicked. The weight of procedure pressed in from all sides. I did not speak. My role was not to prosecute or defend. My role was to ensure the lane stayed clean. Late in the afternoon, a request came through asking for a clarification I had prepared for days earlier. I provided it and stepped back. The man from the other agency passed again, and this time his look held a measure of respect that was not personal. It was professional. That mattered more. When the day ended, the envelope remained on my desk like a boundary marker. I sealed my notebook and placed it in my bag. As I walked out the building, lights dimmed and the security presence relaxed by a degree. The no salute order lifted without ceremony. Outside, the air was cooler. I understood then that secrecy is not power. Process is. The strange orders were not arbitrary. They were protection for everyone involved. I checked my phone and saw a missed call from my father, time-stamped during the recess. I did not return it. I added one line to my notes beneath the disclosure entry. Disclosure submitted. Recusal parameters acknowledged. The system was moving. The hearing room filled slowly, and then all at once the way spaces do when attention converges. Reporters took their seats along the back wall with notebooks open and cameras ready but quiet. Microphones were tested and muted. The moderator reviewed ground rules in a tone that flattened emotion before it could rise. This was not theater. This was procedure. My father entered under escort and chose a seat near the center where he was used to being seen. He straightened his jacket and scanned the room as if confidence could still bend outcomes. When the session opened, he spoke early and often, attempting to frame the discussion before facts could narrow it. He referenced experience and success and community impact. He tried to control the room with familiarity. The moderator thanked him and redirected him to the question. Please answer yes or no. The first correction landed softly. The second landed harder. Cameras clicked. I sat at the side table with my folder closed and my notebook open to the page I had prepared. I was not there to argue. I was there to ensure the lane stayed clean. As questions moved from general to specific, my father shifted tactics. He leaned forward and spoke about misunderstandings and overzealous review. He suggested motives without naming them. Then he turned his attention to me. He said my name and suggested that my career had changed me, that I had become rigid, that I no longer understood how the world worked. He said it with a half smile meant to provoke a response. The room waited. I felt the old ache rise and settle. I did not take the bait. When asked to respond, I lifted my eyes to the moderator and spoke one sentence. I am under oath. The words did not accuse, they clarified. The moderator nodded and the record moved on. My father attempted to pivot again, referencing endorsements and relationships. The moderator asked for documentation. Please submit the record. My father hesitated and then spoke around the request. The moderator interrupted. Answer the question. Silence followed. The crowd reaction was not loud. It was an absence. Pens paused. Cameras held steady. The quiet was heavier than noise. When the next question came, it required dates and names. My father provided a story. The moderator asked for verification. My father gestured toward me again. I did not respond. The legal officer reminded him that witnesses do not confer. Reese was protected by the same rules that bound everyone else. That mattered. The room continued to narrow. Each time my father attempted to broaden the narrative, it was brought back to record. Each time he tried to personalize it, the moderator cut him off, Please stick to the facts. The cameras captured every pause. At one point, a reporter raised a hand and asked for clarification on third-party involvement. The question was allowed. The answer could not avoid process. Names were requested. Channels were outlined. My father stumbled and corrected himself and stumbled again. The moderator asked him to slow down. Take your time. Answer the question. The pressure was visible now. The confidence he wore at dinner did not function here. This room did not respond to volume or charm. It responded to documentation. I tracked the sequence and wrote down exact phrasing. I noted the moments where the moderator intervened and the reasons given. I noted the timestamps. When a question touched on conflict disclosures, the legal officer referenced my submission. Disclosure received and acknowledged. No comment. That line protected me without spectacle. My father tried one last angle. He questioned my credibility by implication. He said that loyalty can be compromised when ideology replaces common sense. The moderator did not allow it. Personal commentary is out of order. Answer the question or we will move on. The cameras clicked again. The silence returned. My father answered. The answer was incomplete. The moderator moved on. When the session recessed, the room exhaled as one. Reporters whispered, phones vibrated. I closed my notebook and waited. My father did not look at me. The power he had tried to wield publicly had been broken not by confrontation, but by structure. After the recess, the final segment began. The moderator asked if there were any additional materials to submit. I felt the weight of my folder, then not as burden, but as responsibility. I did not stand yet. I listened as my father answered one more procedural question and failed to provide a document he claimed existed. The moderator noted the deficiency and requested submission by a deadline. Cameras captured the note. I understood in that moment what records do to reputations when they surface at the right time. As the hearing adjourned, the crowd remained quiet. There was no applause. There was no outrage. There was only a sense of inevitability. Reporters filed out with their footage. The legal officer collected documents. I gathered my notes. My father stood and looked smaller than he had at dinner, not because he had lost money or status in that instant, but because the room had refused to perform with him. As I prepared to submit the final packet I had organized over months, I understood the consequence. This would not be loud. It would be thorough, and it would end the version of his story he had been telling for years. I submitted the evidence through the channels exactly as required, because process is not optional when truth needs to stand. I did not send anything directly to reporters, and I did not confront anyone in hallways. I logged the packet with timestamps and references and confirmations, then waited. The first consequence arrived quietly. An email went out to stakeholders stating that a contract was being paused pending review. The word freeze appeared without emphasis and without apology. It was enough. Within days, the board announced an internal inquiry framed as routine governance. Partners who once returned calls in minutes began asking for time. Some stopped answering altogether. This was how dominoes fall in real life, not with explosions, but with calendars clearing and meetings postponed. I watched the pattern and took notes the same way I had learned to do with everything else. When questions came, they came through counsel and compliance, and I answered only what I could answer. The rest belonged to the record. The second consequence pulled Carter into the light. His signature appeared on documents he had always treated as ceremonial. Authorization was not ceremonial. Delegation was not harmless. When investigators asked why approvals were routed through him, he said he was following instructions. They asked whose. He hesitated. The silence was captured and logged. I felt no relief watching it happen. I felt clarity. This was not about punishment. It was about accountability arriving at the addresses it had been sent to for years. My father attempted to project calm. He spoke of confidence and continuity and reassured contacts that reviews end and markets move on. But the partners had already begun to withdraw. Letters arrived citing risk tolerance and fiduciary duty. The language was polite and final. In parallel, the contract office issued a notice that procurement activities connected to the matter were suspended. The phrase pending outcome appeared again. It is remarkable how quickly rooms empty when that phrase is used. Through all of it, I remained where I was supposed to be. I answered questions. I documented interactions. I did not editorialize. When asked why I had recognized the pattern so early, I offered one sentence and nothing more. I had seen it before. That was true. Years earlier, I had been part of a team that reviewed a public infrastructure project tied to water and access. The indicators were subtle then, too. Timing gaps, third-party layering, confidence that relied on familiarity rather than documentation. We flagged it early, and the project was corrected before harm spread. I did not claim heroism. I stated experience. The record reflected it. Investigators nodded because experience explains recognition better than motive ever could. The consequences accelerated. A lender requested additional assurances. A board member resigned citing personal reasons. Carter was placed on administrative leave pending review of delegated authority. My father called it a misunderstanding and asked for patience. Patience is a privilege extended by trust, and trust was gone. Through counsel, I received a request for clarification that confirmed the direction of travel. The process had momentum now, and it did not require me to push. Then my phone rang with a number I had not seen in years. I let it go to voicemail and listened later. The voice was familiar and soft in a way it had never been. "Sweetheart," he said it like a bridge. He spoke about family and loyalty and how hard this was for everyone. He said mistakes happen and families handle things privately. He asked me to consider the bigger picture and the cost to our name. He did not apologize. He did not ask what I needed. He asked for help. I saved the voicemail and logged the time. The family card had been played. The next call came the following evening. He said he understood my commitment to rules and asked if there was anything I could say publicly to steady confidence. Just a sentence. Just context. I replied with the same words I had used before. Put it in writing. The silence on the line was longer this time. I could hear his breathing. He ended the call without a goodbye. Messages followed from relatives who had never asked about my work, but suddenly wanted to know how I was holding up. I answered none of them. Counsel advised that silence was appropriate. I agreed. As weeks passed, the review expanded in scope. Emails were requested. Calendars were reconciled. A timeline emerged that no speech could undo. Partners withdrew formally. The board scheduled a vote. Press scrutiny intensified, but stayed factual. There were no headlines about me, and I was grateful for that. The story was not my resilience. It was their risk. Carter requested a meeting through intermediaries and then withdrew the request. He sent a text that said he never meant for this to happen. I did not respond. I understood then that consequence is not cruelty. It is simply the end of insulation. My father tried once more to reach me through my mother. Her message framed concern as love and urgency as illness. She said stress was affecting her health and asked me to think about that. I read it once and archived it. Guilt has always been their currency, and it was no longer accepted here. The dominoes continued. A regulatory notice confirmed the freeze. A partner publicly exited. A board action removed executive authority pending outcome. None of it required my commentary. It required my restraint. In the quiet between updates, I felt the weight of what had shifted. Not power, position. I had not taken anything from them. I had stopped shielding them from what they had built. When the next voicemail arrived, it was shorter. He said he needed to talk. He said family should not end like this. He said he would do anything. The family card had lost its shine, but it was still being held up. I closed my notebook and wrote one line at the bottom of the page. This is not finished. He asked for 5 minutes and said it like a concession. The message came through counsel and then again, directly as if repetition could turn urgency into consent. I agreed to a meeting in a public lobby where policies were posted, and cameras were visible and access was logged. That was the boundary. When he arrived, he wore the calm face he used with investors and donors. He opened with my name and softened it with familiarity. "Sweetheart," he said as if time had rewound. He thanked me for meeting and spoke about how hard the last weeks had been. He described sleepless nights and the weight of responsibility and the unfairness of how things had escalated. He never said sorry. He never asked what the damage had done to me. He said he needed one sentence from me, a line that could steady confidence, a line that would remind people who I was to him. I listened without interrupting and watched the reflections in the glass behind him where the security desk and cameras framed the space. When he finished, I said one sentence and kept my voice even. "I will not use my uniform to cover your choices." He blinked as if the words had been delivered in a language he did not recognize. He tried again with a different angle. "Family," he said. He said mistakes are handled inside families, and outsiders do not understand nuance. He said he had built everything and protected everyone and that loyalty was owed. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue facts. I repeated the boundary in different words and said the process would conclude without my intervention. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. He said I was being dramatic and that this would pass if I stopped being stubborn. He said people would forget if there was nothing new to feed them. I said nothing and let the silence do the work. The cameras continued to record, and the lobby policy signage remained in frame. He exhaled sharply, and his tone changed. He said I was ungrateful. He said the opportunities I had came from his name, even when I wore a different one on my chest. He said I should remember where I came from. Then the mask slipped, and the sentence landed like it always had. "You owe me. I made you." The words echoed against the marble and drew a glance from the desk. I felt the old reflex to shrink and the newer discipline to stand still. I looked at him and said the meeting was over. He reached for my arm and stopped when a guard stepped forward and reminded us of policy. He pulled his hand back and laughed without humor. He said I was choosing strangers over blood. I said nothing. I turned and walked toward the doors, knowing the cameras would capture the exit and the timestamp would be clean. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. I stood there for a moment and let my breathing slow. My phone buzzed as if on cue. It was my mother. I let it ring and then answered. Her voice was different this time. It was not careful or polished. It was tired. She said she did not know how to fix what she had helped make. She said she had watched the meeting from the security feed because he had insisted she come. She said she heard the words and that they had finally sounded as cruel to her as they always had to me. She said she was sorry and that she had been afraid for a long time. She said she had chosen quiet because quiet felt like survival. She asked if we could talk somewhere private and said she did not want to be in the middle anymore. I closed my eyes and felt the familiar pull to rescue. I answered honestly and without softness. I said it was too late for quiet confessions, and the truth had its own timing. I said I needed space and that the process would finish what it had started. She cried and said she understood, even as I could hear the part of her that still hoped for a shortcut. I ended the call gently and stood still until the shaking passed. Inside the lobby, my father paced and spoke to the guard as if authority could be borrowed. It could not. I left the building and returned to my duties where my work had names and numbers and checklists, and none of them belonged to him. Later that afternoon, counsel confirmed the recording request from the lobby had been preserved per policy. The words were on record. The reach had been witnessed. The boundary had been enforced by more than my will. That evening, another message arrived from my mother. She said she had packed a bag and that she was staying with a friend. She said she should have said something years ago and that she was sorry she waited until it cost me peace. I did not reply. Not because I did not care, but because care does not erase consequence. The night ended with a quiet report update and a calendar reminder for the next procedural step. I wrote one sentence in my notebook before closing it. The truth does not need me to shout. It only needs me to stop protecting lies. The consequences settled the way weather does after a storm, not all at once, but with a steady clarity that made the air easier to breathe. Grant lost his board seat first. The announcement was brief and procedural and framed as interim pending investigation. Interim stretched into permanence when the findings were released and confidence did not return. An inquiry expanded and narrowed at the same time, focused on governance failures and influence peddling that could not be explained away by charisma. Elaine felt the shift in quieter ways. Invitations stopped, conversations cooled. People who had once leaned in for proximity leaned back to create distance. Community is generous with applause, but exacting with silence. Carter lost his job after the review of delegated authority concluded. The notice cited standards and oversight and reputational risk. The words were clean. The impact was not. He called once and left a message that mixed apology with self-protection. I did not return it, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because my peace required limits. I chose calm over closure. In the weeks that followed, I returned to routine. Routine is not small. It is how stability is built. I did my work and answered questions and closed loops. I slept without checking my phone. I ate meals without rehearsing conversations. I did not rush forgiveness. Forgiveness without repair is a transaction that benefits the person who caused the harm. I chose distance instead. Distance is not cruelty. It is care with a spine. When people asked how I felt, I said I was steady. When they asked what I would do next, I said I would keep my record clean and my boundaries intact. Respect is earned. Family is who protects your dignity. Those sentences were not slogans. They were rules I had learned by watching what happens when rules are ignored. One afternoon, a small package arrived without a return address. Inside was an old enlistment brochure folded flat along the creases I remembered. It had been handled with care. No note, no signature, just the paper and the crease. I held it for a long moment and felt the weight of a late admission. It was not an apology. It was acknowledgement. I did not reach out in response. Some messages arrive after the window for conversation has closed. That does not make them worthless. It makes them final. I placed the brochure in a drawer and closed it. Peace is not loud. It is the absence of bracing for impact. I had it then, not because everyone agreed with me, but because the system had done what systems are supposed to do when evidence is respected. I did not win anything. I stopped losing myself. I stood at my window that evening and watched the light change across the buildings, and thought about the years I spent trying to be legible to people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I thought about the cost of silence and the cost of speaking, and how the cheaper option is often the one that empties you out. I chose the harder path because it kept me intact. When the phone rang again weeks later, I let it ring. I knew who it was. I knew what they would say. I also knew what I would not do. I would not use my uniform to cover choices that were not mine. I would not trade peace for proximity. I would not confuse blood with belonging. The story ended without applause and without reconciliation scenes that tidy everything up. It ended with clarity. It ended with me choosing myself without drama. If you are listening to this, and it sounds familiar, if you have ever had to rebuild after a toxic family, share this, so I know you are still here.